We might begin because time is very precious, so I'll hand over to Lou to lead the prayers. Thank you.
Taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create, through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds, and may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Master Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in a concentration on a categorized phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors in consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om, Gate Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi, Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. The praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son. All creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dhamma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. You whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Arapasanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness of closing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. By the virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas visualized before me, this mandala built on a base resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon, may all sentient beings share in its good effect. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dhammakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nayatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious gurus.
Thank you very much. While giving his discourses in India recently, His Holiness mentioned that he keeps a copy of Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life next to his pillow. And that shows the incredible intimacy with which His Holiness preserves and respects that incredible text. He said it is the supreme text for the method for generating bodhicitta. So we should really rejoice that we have this opportunity together, and particularly today because rejoicing is going to be one of the key topics. So we've now arrived at the 3rd chapter, and this involves the full acceptance of the awakening mind. And Shantideva is determined to soften and prepare our minds for the actual receiving of the Bodhisattva vow, if you like, by some very, very careful preliminary verses, which we're going to look at today. So it's not until we arrive at verse 23 that the actual formal conferring of the bodhicitta vows is performed. So we really need to pay attention to those earlier verses and to fathom why they're so incredibly significant. So the first verses explicitly deal with rejoicing. So I'm going to read those verses out, just one after the other, so we have a sort of grasp. Verse 1, gladly do I rejoice in the virtue that relieves the misery of all those in unfortunate states, and that places them, those with suffering, in happiness. And 2, I rejoice in that gathering of virtue that is a cause for the Arhat's awakening. I rejoice in the definite freedom of embodied creatures from the misery of cyclic existence. And 3, I rejoice in the awakening of the Buddhas and also in the spiritual levels of their children. And 4th, and with gladness I rejoice in the ocean of virtues from developing an awakening mind that wishes all beings to be happy, as well as in the deeds that bring them benefit. So even at a glance, you can see here there's an escalating pattern of rejoicing, a kind of an expansion of the field that's been focused upon for rejoicing. And we start in the first verse with taking delight in the causes of higher status together with their effects, their beneficial effects. So as the Lam Rim makes clear, the cumulative, this is also the cumulative structure of the 3 scopes. So we're effectively rejoicing in the practices of the initial scope. We can also appreciate that in this opening verse, we're also taking delight in the smallest acts of ordinary human kindness, just as we are in the uncommon actions of those who practice perfect morality, etc. And in addition to that, those who are intent on achieving liberation, full enlightenment. So this explains the kind of escalating focus that Shantideva is setting forth. But in order to really get to the gist of this, we need to consider why we're rejoicing at this point. So Geshe Doga emphasizes the reason by indicating the significance of Gelt Subje's headings. So the first heading is taking the mind of enlightenment. So that's the general heading. And beneath that, he says the actual taking of the mind of enlightenment after having applied the conducive conditions of accumulating merit, such as rejoicing in virtue and so forth. So this really says everything. There's great significance here in the words after having applied the conducive conditions of accumulating merit. Geshe Doga glosses, with anything that we wish to achieve, there are certain factors that oppose that achievement and certain factors that contribute to it. Likewise, with the development of bodhicitta, there are certain opposing factors and certain conditions that are conducive. The opposing factors are those negativities that have to be removed through purification processes, which was the topic of the second chapter. And the conducive conditions themselves is referring to the means by which we accumulate merit. So we're now swinging onto the means by which we can accumulate merit. So we have to recognize here that there are other means of accumulating merit, such as prostrating, making offerings, and so forth. And these were discussed in the second chapter. But here we're moving in very, very clearly to rejoicing itself. If we look at this famous 7-branch prayer, we'll notice that we have a sequence described there, starting with veneration or prostration, refuge, offerings, confession of negative actions. And then we have rejoicing in virtue, requesting that the teachers should turn the wheel of Dharma, the prayer that the teachers will not pass into parinirvana, and the dedication of one's roots of virtue for the benefit of others. So we're to understand here that the progression that Shantideva is engaging is exactly equivalent to that sequence found in the 7-branch practice. So the 7-branch verse, which many of us will recite as part of our daily prayers, is, I prostrate with body, speech, and mind in faith. Each and every offering I make, including those really performed and those mentally transformed, I confess every sin collected since beginninglessness of samsaric life. I rejoice in all ordinary and noble beings' actions. Please, Buddha, by living as our guide until samsara ends, reveal the teachings to sentient beings. I dedicate the virtues of myself and others to the great enlightenment. So we see here the progression: prostration, offering, confessing, rejoicing, confessing the Buddhas to live long, to continuously turn the wheel of Dharma, and then dedication. So this sequence holds enormous developmental import. What by that I mean is it coincides with the actual way in which we can develop the accumulation of merit necessary to be in a position to receive and generate the precious mind of bodhicitta. So I'll only address the first 4 branches here, particularly as the earlier 3 were dealt with in chapter 2. So, namely, how are we to even begin to appreciate the good and beneficial actions performed by others if we haven't become aware of the flawless qualities of the refuge objects to which we prostrate? This is quickly encapsulating the earlier steps. And without such an exemplary yardstick as epitomized by the refuge objects themselves, how can we begin to seek to unlock the vice-like grip of our own self-cherishing mind, to even recognize its painful limits, if you like, let alone find the wherewithal to rejoice in the virtues of others, particularly if we can't even rejoice in our own virtues because we don't recognize or understand them. So by making extensive offerings from the depths of our heart, including those really performed and those mentally transformed, to those refuge objects, and on behalf of suffering mother sentient beings, we have already sought to unlock the grip of our self-cherishing attitude and replace it with a mind of genuine generosity. And this generosity takes the form of the wish to give all sentient beings whatever is needed to secure their happiness, both in the temporal and ultimate senses. As His Holiness says, as Shantideva stresses in engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds, making offerings is necessary to accumulate the merit that supports us in generating bodhicitta and attaining full awakening. So in dependence on that generosity, by making deep and extensive confessions, we've made already serious attempts to rid our minds of the imprints of non-virtue accumulated since beginningless time. At the same time, by observing perfect ethical conduct, which aims not to hurt or to injure another sentient being, a single sentient being, we've sought to accumulate virtuous propensities that will enable us to take actual dynamic steps towards caring and protecting them. Each sentient being without exception. So key to this capacity is our manifestation of regret for having done so many painful actions and destructive actions towards others in the past. As His Holiness says, regret is the main cause to purify destructive actions. And the stronger it is, the stronger will be the second power. The determination to restrain from such actions in the future. This step, says His Holiness, gives you the inner strength to begin changing your ways and counteracting habitual harmful behaviour. End of quote. So on this basis, and only on this basis, are we now capable of not only recognising the importance of performing only virtuous actions, but also admiring and rejoicing in the virtuous actions performed by others. In this way, we can appreciate how Shantideva is so very carefully unfolding these essential aspects of practice. Those of purifying our negativities in order to remove the conditions opposing the generation of bodhicitta, and those of involving the accumulation of merit necessary in order to ensure that positive conditions are amassed conducive to the generation of the mind of bodhicitta. So as Geshe Doga puts it, without engaging in these two aspects, there is no sense in which we can establish the basis for generating the mind of enlightenment. So I think we're now well positioned to begin to appreciate why His Holiness refers to rejoicing in the context of the opening verses of Shantideva's third chapter in terms of securing the qualifications required to call ourselves practitioners, let alone aspiring bodhisattvas. His Holiness says, when we rejoice in the good qualities and the positive actions of others, we accumulate merit ourselves. By rejoicing in our own positive actions, we increase and strengthen their effect. On the other hand, if we show off the few good qualities we have and are jealous of those of others, we do not even deserve to be called a practicing Buddhist. So we should rejoice in all positive actions, whether of the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, or ordinary beings. End of quote. So His Holiness indicates that rejoicing in our own and others' virtue is an excellent method to fill our mind with hope and joy. And it's in this way that it works as an antidote to feelings of competitiveness and jealousy that might otherwise consume us. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche similarly says, I quote, "Rejoicing is also a remedy against jealousness. In the West, this is a very good practice, even for non-believers. Because if we are jealous of somebody else, that prevents others fulfilling their wishes. And through that, it prevents you from fulfilling your wishes. It creates the karma for this. So not only does jealousy harm others, but it also harms you. That's what happens in reality. But people who don't understand the Dharma don't realize this. That means the majority of people in the world, not only in this world, but in the numberless universes and all sentient beings of the 6 realms, you can't imagine. So practice the opposite of jealousness and rejoice. For example, if others have a beautiful house rejoice how wonderful it is that they have this beautiful house. If somebody has a good car, rejoice how good it is that they have this car. If somebody has a huge amount of money, rejoice how good it is that that person has this money. If somebody has found a good friend and that is what they wanted, rejoice how good it is that that person has fulfilled their wishes, and so on like that. When you rejoice, psychologically, you are keeping your mind in a happy state. Jealousness brings the mind down. It makes the mind sad and brings the mind down. It leads to depression. End of quote. So in the light of this, it would make great sense for Western psychotherapies to incorporate rejoicing in their armory of techniques for dealing with restless and disturbed states of mind. So there are three spheres or operational domains, if you like, of rejoicing being presented here. Rejoicing in your own virtue invigorates and multiplies it so that it will increase day by day. So that's the first sphere. Also, admire and rejoice in the virtues of people you know and people you don't, reflecting repeatedly on their constructive thoughts, feelings, words, and deeds, the second sphere. And the third, rejoicing in the virtues and spiritual attainments of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, solitary realizers, and hearers throughout all time and space. This creates vast merit. Tsongkhapa makes the same point by referring to 5 types of being in relation to rejoicing. Tsongkhapa says, I rejoice in all merit, whatever it may be, of all the conquerors of the 10 directions, the conqueror's children, pratyeka Buddhas, those with no more to learn, and those with more to learn. So Tsongkhapa defines rejoicing or identifies it as a means to remember the benefits of the virtues of these 5 types of persons, and then to cultivate delight in them as a poor person would upon discovering a treasure. So in relation to those with more to learn, and presumably this includes ourselves, His Holiness explains, quote, if you and others are on similar levels of the path, by rejoicing in their virtue, you accumulate merit equal to theirs. If they are of lesser attainment, your rejoicing creates more merit than their original virtuous action. The practice of virtue is praised because through making a small effort, great merit is accumulated. End of quote. So this explains why Shantideva is emphasizing rejoicing at this point of his text. Because there is no more virtuous mind than bodhicitta. Therefore, those who hold it or merely seek to hold it constitute a uniquely potent object of rejoicing. Even to think how wonderful this mind of bodhicitta is, let alone work to produce it within our own mental continuum, accumulates an incredible storehouse of merit. And in this way, we're most favorably situated to approach embracing the Bodhisattva way or deeds ourselves. So I must, at this point, a joyous point, introduce just the shade of a shadow, if you like, the intimation of a shadow. Geshe Doga, in his great pragmatism, ventures to suggest that this kind of rejoicing is not at all how we have formerly proceeded. Rather, we have rejoiced in having the opportunity to create negativity. This takes the grotesque form, and I quote Geshe Doga, "We think, for years, I have wanted to experience this, and I've not had the opportunity so far. It's really incredible that I have this opportunity now. How wonderful. Rejoicing in negativity in this way is completely contrary to the actual practice of Dharma. So we must definitely protect our minds from this danger." End of quote. So you might think this is not really applying to us, but rejoicing when someone we know takes revenge on an enemy would be a classic case in point. I just know from my own experience, my social experience, that these are the sorts of scenarios that often take place around relationship breakups. A lot of ragged edges there, and people often celebrate, perversely rejoice when an afflicted party is somehow benefited by the opponent perceived getting their just desserts in some way. So this is rejoicing in negativity. So in order to just zero in more clearly, I'm going to now go through the opening verses one by one, but combine them with Gelt Subje's very, very useful headings. So the first, rejoicing in the virtues that are the causes of higher status and in their effects. And so the verse, gladly do I rejoice in the virtue that relieves the misery of those, all those in unfortunate states, and that places those with suffering in happiness. So in this verse, we're focusing on rejoicing in the causes of higher status, referring to higher rebirths. And this is because by performing virtuous deeds, such beings, those still trapped, do create some temporary respite, albeit temporary, from suffering, the problem of suffering. Also, because they are so deeply habituated to non-virtuous deeds, it is remarkable that nonetheless, they can sometimes find it possible to produce a virtuous deed. So by rejoicing in that, we are also directly opposing the negative forces that we find present within our own minds. As Geshe Doga says, the main point is that rejoicing serves as the antidote to the negativities or vices that may otherwise arise in our mind. Genuine rejoicing opposes pride, while rejoicing in the virtue of others helps to overcome jealousy. So when we say that we're rejoicing in those who are seeking higher status, this means we're rejoicing in the deeds of those seeking higher status. And this does not mean that we're referring to deeds based on a genuine renunciation, meaning that we've made efforts or are making efforts to definitely emerge from samsara. So in this opening rejoicing, if you like, we're paying homage and joyous respect to those actions which at least are causing states of relative less suffering within samsara. So we're starting at a very, very nitty-gritty practical level. So the foundation here is one of, I'll suggest, great humility. as our own potential for suffering is intense and even immense. Therefore, we rejoice not from a position of pride or pompous haughtiness when we witness an ordinary being performing an action that will ripen as happiness. Indeed, by recognizing how we are likewise mired in samsaric suffering, we have a foundation for a very deep, a very real empathy. This empathy anchors our rejoicing in reality, but at the same time, it intensifies our resolve to rally and to utilize this precious human rebirth, because we are determined to absolutely seize the great advantages that it offers us. Kunsang Pelden indicates that Shantideva here is particularly focused on the causal point of view, in that he is pointing to those practices, such as the 10 virtuous actions, which are not associated with the determination to leave samsara, nor with bodhicitta, nor with the practice of egolessness. In other words, the focus here is on celebrating, quote from Kunsang Pelden again, this kind of virtue that releases samsaric beings from the suffering and torments of hell and the other evil destinies, and places them, for the time being at least, in the bliss of the higher states. So to quote Kunsang Pelden, Shantideva takes pleasure, untainted by jealous rivalry, at the happiness enjoyed by beings while they are in divine and human realms, where even though suffering is a constant liability for them, they reap the positive benefits of the positive actions accomplished in the past, and have the enjoyment of physical beauty, youth, power, renown, wealth, and every perfect pleasure in the sense of samsaric pleasure. So moving to the second verse, Gyaltsabje's heading is rejoicing in the virtues of the causes of mere liberation and their effects. And the verse reads, I rejoice in that gathering of virtue that is the cause for the arhat's awakening. I rejoice in the definite freedom of embodied creatures from the miseries of cyclic existence. So you can see here the clear escalation in that we're now rejoicing in the gathering of virtue that is the cause of an arhat's liberation. So our analysis is necessarily deeper in that it now embraces the manner in which we're bound by karma and delusion to the wheel of cyclic existence, together with the manner in which we carry the great burden of contaminated aggregates which compound our suffering. So by understanding the nature of samsara in this subtle way, and this is of course referring to the teachings carried in the medium scope of the Lam Rim, we can truly rejoice in the brave manner in which renunciates practice the 3 higher trainings, morality, meditation, and wisdom, in order to be free from samsara. So in other words, here the goal is not mere higher status, but definite freedom or definite emergence. So again, Kunsang Pelden writes very poetically of how we're to rejoice in their liberative deeds. I quote, "For them, the ocean of blood and tears has dried up. The mountains of bones have been leveled. Remembering the qualities of realization and elimination attained by such beings, for whom gold is as valuable as a lump of earth, Shantideva has faith in them and rejoices. For it is due to their kindness that we can receive Vinaya teachings, which are sublime and worthy of praise, and which the Buddha, in his compassion, left for us as both teachings and teacher. End of quote. So at the same time, rejoicing in the virtuous deeds of those intent on liberation sows the seeds of liberation within ourselves. As Geshe Doga indicates, we are thereby led towards a real appreciation of the three principles of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, and the realization of emptiness. So we're dealing here specifically with renunciation. So we're also to understand that we're not just rejoicing in the deeds of hearers and solitary realize and arhats who have achieved the path of no more learning, but we're also rejoicing in those Mahayana great scope practitioners who must also, that word also is crucial, engage in the practices to overcome the causes of samsara. Because if they don't, they'll have no means of attaining their great goal of full enlightenment and therefore benefiting others perfectly, which is their bodhicitta promise. So as Kunzang Pelden indicates, in this way we can see that Shantideva in this verse is implicitly rejoicing in the final result of the Bodhisattva practices, which involves traversing in common the practices of the middle scope practitioner, not sidestepping or leaping over them, in other words. He says, Shantideva also rejoices in the virtue tending to liberation that is possessed by those beings of the great scope of the Mahayana, again in both its causal and resultant aspects, because he delights in the final result, namely perfect enlightenment, endowed with the infinite qualities of elimination and realization attained by the Buddhas, the protectors and guides of beings. And he also rejoices in recognizing its provisional short-term result, namely the qualities of elimination and realization from perfect joy, which is the first Bodhisattva ground, to the cloud of Dharma, which is the 10th. So you can see here that the teachings of renunciation are built in to that framework. So when we get to the third verse, we have the heading by Gyaltsab Je, rejoicing in the causes of highest enlightenment and their effects. And the verse reads, I rejoice in the awakening of the Buddhas and also in the spiritual level of their children. And verse 4, and with gladness I rejoice in the ocean of virtue from developing an awakening mind that wishes all beings to be happy, as well as in the deeds that bring them benefit. So here our rejoicing is focused directly on the causes of highest enlightenment together with its effects. And two causes of the ultimate state of enlightenment are importantly identified by Gyaltsab Je in his commentary on these verses. The first, the ocean of virtue, that is the mind generation for complete enlightenment. This is a reference to the bodhicitta that is found in the minds of those who are bodhisattvas. And the reference to ocean indicates that such virtue is immense. It's as expansive as the ocean. And secondly, we're rejoicing in the actions that benefit sentient beings. This refers specifically to the deeds of a bodhisattva, such as the 6 perfections. As Geshe-Doga likewise indicates, thus one acknowledges the great deeds of the Bodhisattvas in practicing the 6 perfections, the extent of their generosity, the deeds practiced by Bodhisattvas to benefit all sentient beings, the great extent of their morality and ethics that the Bodhisattvas observe in order to benefit sentient beings, and likewise their patience, joyous effort, meditation, and wisdom. Moreover, by recalling the incredible deeds arising from engaging in the practices of the 6 perfections, one develops a genuine sense of appreciation and rejoices in the incredible deeds and merits of Bodhisattvas. So I just wanted to illustrate this point with a charming story. The merit generated by rejoicing in this way even exceeds the merit gained by the perpetrator of the action in the first instance. This is illustrated by the story of King Prasenajit, who invited the Buddha and his disciples to his palace and did them service with profound reverence. On seeing this, a poor beggar woman rejoiced in the king's actions, and as a result, the Buddha dedicated the king's merit to her. So it's a beautiful story. So this poor woman, in rejoicing in the king's vast, virtuous deeds, accumulated in excess the benefits of those deeds herself. So the conclusion then is that whenever we hear, see, or come into contact with the virtuous actions of others, we should always rejoice in them. This is a great challenge. Always rejoice in them. Do we do this? The Prajna Paramita Sanchaya Sutra says, I quote, Meru and the universe 3,000-fold may all be weighed upon a weighing scale, but not the virtue that rejoicing gives. So the question we're to ask ourselves from a practice point of view then is, do we follow this instruction? Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says, if we are going to accumulate the merit that one bodhisattva accumulates in one day, it would take us 15,000 years without rejoicing. But by rejoicing, we can accumulate in a few seconds the merit that would otherwise have taken us 15,000 years. In short, the benefits are immeasurable. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche also says, rejoicing is the cause to receive the Buddha's holy body that has no negative qualities at all. It is just extremely attractive and perfect in beauty. So we now arrive at the 5th verse, and we're moving on to the next branch effectively, which is the requesting to turn the wheel of Dharma. As Geshe-Doga indicates, it is obvious that all the Buddhas, due to the force of their compassion, will spontaneously teach and thus do not require to be asked or requested. However, to make such a request from our side bears great significance. Namely, it indicates our willingness to receive the Dharma and also establishes an auspicious interdependent connection with the teacher. So this is incredibly important to consider. Kunsang Pelden similarly says, Shantideva prays that all the Buddhas kindle the lamp of the sublime Dharma, thereby overcoming and removing the ignorance of beings in ways appropriate to their varying capacities. May the Buddhas reveal, he prays, the authentic light of primordial wisdom. End of quote. So the example of the shining lamp of Dharma extending to all bewildered in misery's gloom is indeed a potent metaphorical image. It invites us to offer light whenever we see it towards this purpose. Considered in this dynamic, practical way, we'll find multiple opportunities to practice this branch. So I know Kabje Rinpoche, Zopa Rinpoche, when he's talking about this requesting practice, will have us walking along, we see street lamps we offer to illuminate the darkness from the minds of all beings with the Holy Dharma. We turn a light switch on in our bedroom as we enter it, the bathroom, wherever. So you can see here, when we turn a light off, for that matter, we can imagine that we're eliminating even, we're sort of, how can we put it? We're becoming aware of the gloom in which sentient beings are living and therefore have to make renewed efforts to illuminate the darkness that is already enclosing their mind. So whatever circumstances arising, we can utilize it to practice in this way. So I'm reminded here of a very powerful verse from Ashvaghosha's Aspiration in 70 Stanzas, which says, "May I joyfully cross without hesitation pits so filled with burning embers of fire that there is no space, so as to hear even one word of the good doctrine." So this verse measures, I think, in a very, very pungent way, the keenness with which we should consider the Holy Dharma and its value. To even hear one word of the Holy Dharma is that precious that will cross a burning pit of embers to receive it. So to wish others to hear Dharma in a continuous rain, inexhaustible rain, is surely wondrous, as this is how sentient beings come to savor the blissful nectar of extreme peace. As the Buddha says, Buddha said, for those dwelling now in Magadha, with wisdom, faith, and ears unstopped, with hearts receptive to the Dharma, and who think no harm, for them the doors of deathlessness, O Brahma, I throw open wide. And it was with those words that the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, began to teach. So as Ashvaghosha also says, no matter how many days there are since the awakened beings became enlightened under the Bodhi tree, I beseech those who are alive and abiding hereafter to cause the incomparable nectar of truth to rain upon ongoing beings. So while making this request, we can perform the following visualization, and I'm quoting here from Geshe Doga's instructions. While making this request, the physical gesture should be indicated as indicated in the commentary, a respectful manner with one's palms folded. When doing this practice, it is appropriate to visualize that one is presenting 1,000-spoked golden wheel as an offering to request the Buddhas and one's gurus to turn the wheel of Dharma. As extensively explained in the Jawcher preliminary practice, when making the request to turn the wheel of Dharma, one visualizes numerous bodies of oneself, as many bodies as there are enlightened beings, and a replica of oneself in front of each and every enlightened being, requesting them to turn the wheel of Dharma. This visualization, says Geshe Doga, is the supreme means to accumulate vast and extensive merit. Geshe Doga notes that requesting this way also works as a supreme antidote for overcoming the negativities of disparaging the Dharma, which is one of the heaviest negativities one can incur. Those of us who have already taken the Bodhisattva and perhaps also the Tantric vows will recognize this as potentially taking a number of forms. For example, the fourth Bodhisattva vow reads, doubting and denying the Mahayana. And this involves two sub-downfalls, abandoning the Mahayana teachings and seeing the noble Mahayana teachings of the Buddha in general as inferior or false teachings. So in regards to the first branch, when we talk of doubting and denying the Mahayana, we are mainly referring to the teachings of the Bodhisattva vehicle. The scriptural teachings contain the meaning of both the profound and extensive Bodhisattva deeds, such as the Lamrim teachings on the graduated path. In this context, extensive refers to the presentation of great love and compassion, the sevenfold teachings to develop bodhicitta, and so on, whereas the profound refers to the teachings on emptiness. If one was to hear from others that the Lamrim teachings, for example, are not the complete path to enlightenment, and that it would be more worthwhile to know how to meditate on the psychic channels and chakras, according to Tantra. And if one was so influenced, so swayed by the other person's talk that one comes to think that the Mahayana teachings are not the true teaching and don't carry the meaning or the message of the Buddha, then one is denying the Mahayana and therefore infringes this vow. So, of course, the same fault applies if a Mahayanist claims that the Hinayana is not real Dharma. So I just mention these as illustrative examples. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche indicates that we should consider the issue just raised of abandoning the holy Dharma in very real and close terms. It is not an academic topic. Rinpoche says, if you are reading or studying something that is the Buddha's teachings, for example, the philosophical teachings, and you don't understand them, so you give them up as an object of devotion, thinking, what use is this for me? That is avoiding the holy Dharma. If that happens, and from the heart you give up the teachings as an object of devotion, it is abandoning the holy Dharma and incurs unbelievably heavy karma. Abandoning the Dharma is worse, this is Rinpoche's words, is worse than destroying all the statues, stupas, and scriptures in the world. It is heavier than that. So if you give up any Tibetan writing, any text or teaching of the Buddha, even a few lines, it becomes abandoning the holy Dharma. Rinpoche continues, at the beginning of Lama Tsongkhapa's great Lamrim, it mentions that the negative karma of avoiding the Dharma is dangerous, and there is a very real possibility that this can happen to us. We have to know these points and to make sure they don't happen. Even if I don't understand the Buddha's teachings when I read them, or when they are explained, you have to think, oh, I don't understand this now, but I will understand it in the future. It is advised by the gurus that we think in this way, so that we can achieve the ultimate goal of the perfect holy speech of the Buddha, and will be guided in all future lifetimes by the guru. So there are further benefits in requesting the gurus to turn the wheel of Dharma. Geshe Dogen mentions it will also help to overcome wrong views to which we grasp due to our ignorance. This freedom from wrong views will be the case, not just in this lifetime, but in future lifetimes. So this is really, really significant to consider. His Holiness likewise indicates that requesting Dharma teachings also creates the cause to receive teachings in the future. His Holiness says, we should, whenever possible, attend Dharma discourses given by qualified spiritual mentors. As a beginner, study books that would give you a general overview of the path. As you advance, delve into the sutras, the great Indian commentaries, and the commentaries of other Buddhist sages. End of quote. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche mentions yet another advantage. Requesting to turn the wheel of Dharma creates the karma for you to be able to give teachings in the future. So, of course, the great obstacle here is complacency. We imagine, don't we, that the conditions to access and study the Dharma, let alone teach it or receive it, are a natural part of our environment. But this is far from the case. I just want to mention here that in my own sort of experience, visiting the ruins of the great Nalanda University in ancient Magadha, now Bihar, is an edifying experience from this perspective. Once home to many thousands of monks and attracting pilgrims from around the world, its great libraries housed hundreds of thousands of texts. These great repositories of knowledge were sacked and burnt by troops during the Gurud dynasty, circa 1200 CE. Monastics were also slaughtered and many fled. So, as we know, His Holiness always emphasizes how Tibetan Buddhist culture directly inherited and preserved this Nalanda tradition, including its rigorous standards of intellectual inquiry and debate. It's just fascinating. I visited Nalanda Monastery with the incarnation of Geshe Ngawan Dagi when he was a small boy, and the Rinpoche leapt around the ruins, pointing out with his finger where the various buildings had stood and what they were used for. Just mention this as an amazing story. And as we entered Nalanda, the parklands, which is this sort of site of the great monastery, the Rinpoche asked me to carry him on his shoulders and to run. And as we were leaving the monastery, he instructed me to place him on my shoulders again and to run. And I had this sort of amusing flashback that I must have been some kind of a draft horse or a kind of vehicle in the ancient days, and he was re-establishing that connection. But anyway, it's quite remarkable how tangible Nalanda was for him. So the point is that the Buddha himself only began to teach after 49 days of silence following his enlightenment. And this fact is often quoted by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who mentions that the Buddha only began to teach upon the request of his 5 former companions. So I quote, "After his enlightenment, the Buddha is said to have thought, profound and peaceful, free from elaboration, uncompounded luminosity, I have found a nectar-like Dharma, yet if I were to teach it, no one would understand. So I shall remain silent here in the forest." So His Holiness mentions that the words profound and peaceful refer to the Buddha's first round of teachings. Free from elaboration refers to emptiness as revealed in the perfection of wisdom teachings. And uncompounded luminosity refers to Buddha nature, the mind of clear light, explained in the 3rd round of teachings. So His Holiness adds, anticipating that no one would understand his explanation of selflessness, the Buddha remained silent for 49 days. When he met his 5 former companions in Sarnath, they requested him to share with them what he had learnt. He taught the 4 noble truths. He told them that to overcome suffering, it is necessary to eliminate its causes and conditions. The first cause listed in the 12 links of dependent origination is ignorance. So we should be like those 5 disciples. We should make requests for teachings as often as we can in the very best appropriate manner. And sometimes our requests will be met with not maybe an outright refusal, but a kind of apparent non-response. This is actually part of the strategy of our teachers to make sure that our capacity to receive the Dharma is fully ripened. So we request again, and we request again, and our requests will be granted when our teachers consider our sincerity and readiness to be very real. The 6th verse, requesting not to pass beyond sorrow. And the verse reads, "With folded hands I beseech the conquerors who wish to pass away to please remain for countless eons and not to leave the world in darkness." So as with the last branch, this assists in consolidating an auspicious interdependent connection with the Buddhas and our teachers. It secures our fortune to receive teachings from our precious teachers and to meet the Dharma again in a vital living form, not just in terms of this lifetime, but future lifetimes. To make personal requests for our precious teachers to live long and continue to turn the wheel of Dharma for the benefit of sentient beings is therefore a very special practice that we should also engage on a daily basis. His Holiness notes, quote, "Requesting the Buddhas to remain until cyclic existence ends helps to purify negativities created in relation to our spiritual mentors and the Buddhas, and increases our understanding of the importance of having excellent spiritual mentors. Therefore," His Holiness continues, "with heartfelt sincerity, request the emanation bodies of Buddhas not to pass into parinirvana, but to remain in the world to guide sentient beings according to their various dispositions and tendencies. Gyaltsab Subje puts the request as follows. Again, with folded palms, we make the request, please do not cause the wisdom eye of these migrators to be blinded by ignorance. Rather, please remain for uncountable eons to eliminate the darkness of ignorance. Geshe Doga identifies another benefit in making such a request. He says that the immediate benefit, personal benefit derived from this practice of requesting not to pass into sorrow, beyond sorrow, is that one establishes the cause to attain the state of immortality. It is said that a supreme practice to ensure one's own long life is to request a Lama to live long. So, of course, Geshe Doga's point here is that we don't just make this request because we want to live long. It's a sort of boon that arises as a sort of corollary of requesting our teachers to live long. Geshe Doga also identifies a very important benefit. He says, furthermore, it is an antidote to overcoming the negativities that one has accumulated through losing faith in the Guru, which might include disparaging or upsetting the Guru, or inflicting any kind of harm on the Guru's body, and so forth. So, of course, here we mightn't recall performing any such disparaging or disconcerting acts, but this failure of recollection does not mean that such has not occurred in our past. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche reflects on the benefits of requesting the Guru to have a stable life as follows. Requesting to have a stable life is an antidote to disturbing the Guru's holy mind, and it purifies the karma for not meeting the Guru again in the future. Don't think only of this life. You have to think of all the past lives that you have disturbed the holy mind. The result of requesting to have a stable life is that you receive the Vajra holy body. Also, it causes you to have a long life as a result of the karma of requesting the Guru to have a long life, stable life. The objects you request to have a long life are the Gurus and the Buddhas in the Nirmanakaya aspect. So again, we shouldn't fail at every available opportunity to request the Guru to not pass into the state beyond sorrow. It is said that due to being requested by the Upasaka Chandra not to pass into nirvana, the Lord Buddha extended his life for 3 months. And as we make such appeals, we should consider that the Buddhas accept them and agree to remain amongst us. So this is important because it's in this way that we seal the karma of making the request. Now we arrive at verse 7. So you can see here that we're systematically working through the branch practices. And this particular verse deals with general dedication. And it reads, thus by the virtue collected, through all that I have done, may the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. So we've now arrived at the final branch, that of dedication. As Geshe Doga indicates in his commentary, the first 3 limbs, prostrations, offerings, and confession, were the main focus of the second chapter, and we have just completed rejoicing, requesting to turn the wheel of Dharma, and requesting not to pass beyond sorrow. Now comes the final limb, which is to dedicate these practices. End of quote. But we're also to include here all other virtues that one has accumulated in our past, and we dedicate all of these towards clearing away the sufferings of all sentient beings. So this is the meaning of what is being described here by Gyaltsabje as a general dedication. Geshe Doga also mentions that in order to dedicate, we must have something to dedicate. We can't stand empty-handed, as it were. Therefore, we must have accumulated a root virtue in order to successfully dedicate. This is how we distinguish aspirations from dedications. It's a really interesting point. All dedications can be in the form of aspirations, but not all aspirations are necessarily dedications. So when I just mentioned a personal story here, that when I was diagnosed with bone marrow cancer and was sitting in the main Sarah J monastery Gompa in southern India for what I felt was the last time in this lifetime, I remember making very earnest dedication prayers as I recognized that such an opportunity might not be there tomorrow. But I also made aspirational prayers as much as I could muster, as these were an example of what Kabje Zopa Rinpoche refers to as tipping the wish. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says everything exists on the tip of the wish, the intention. So to seek to arrange and direct my future intention in this way, steering it as it were, was something that I could still do, even though my body was falling away from under me. So I share this personal moment not because I have any claims to be any kind of successful practitioner, far from it, but because with death staring me in the face, it suddenly seemed the only appropriate way to proceed. Of course, if our death and impermanence meditations had led to actual realizations, we would be capable of doing this all of the time. So Kabje Zopa Rinpoche very inspiringly says, and I quote, as it says in the sutras, all phenomena are like conditions and well abide at the tip of the wish. Whoever makes even a single prayer, the result will arise in exactly the same way. As it says here, good and bad always depend upon the intention, so one should strive to generate good intentions. End of quote. So to really accept this as profound truth, we must have an abiding and solid acceptance in the law of cause and effect. In 2013, to a man with Lou Gehrig disease, who was almost totally paralyzed, yet was able to type using just the blink of his eye, and who had sought advice from Kabje Zopa Rinpoche on how best to practice, Rinpoche replied by advising the man to practice Tonglen as his main practice. Rinpoche also conferred the Bodhisattva vows over Skype to the man and advised, and I quote, "It is said in the teachings, the piled 3 precious rare sublime one sutra, all phenomena arise due to conditions. They depend on the tip of the wish. This way, your mind is always in a state of happiness. That's really the best psychology. It is the best meditation and the best psychology. Keep your mind always happy." End of quote. So dedication is a very skillful and strategic way of tipping the wish. There are other advantages of dedication. Kabje Rinpoche says, the result is that we receive all the qualities of the Buddha. Dedication is a method for the merits not to get destroyed by heresy and anger. As is mentioned in the sutra requested by Lodro Gatso, I quote, "As in the Pacific Ocean, a drop fell. Until the Pacific Ocean finishes, the drop doesn't finish. Like that, merits dedicated for enlightenment, even enlightenment is achieved. Even when enlightenment is achieved, the merit doesn't finish." So in contrast to this, if not dedicated, Rinpoche indicates merit can be completely destroyed by anger and heresy. So Kabje Rinpoche always stresses that if we're to preserve and protect the result of enlightenment by dedication, it must be sealed with emptiness. He says, and so a very classic example of a dedication sealed with emptiness given by Kabje Rinpoche is as follows. "Due to all the past and present future merits collected by me, by sentient beings and by Buddhas, which are merely labelled by the mind, may the I, who is merely labelled by the mind, achieve the deity's enlightenment, which is merely labelled by the mind, and lead all the sentient beings who are merely labelled by the mind to the deity's enlightenment, which is merely labelled by the mind, by myself alone, who is merely labelled by the mind." Or we can dedicate, and again quoting Rinpoche, "Due to all the past, present and future merits collected by me, by sentient beings and by the Buddhas who are empty from their own side, may I, who is empty from my own side, achieve the deity's enlightenment, which is empty from its own side, and lead all the sentient beings who are empty from their own side to the deity's enlightenment, which is empty from its own side, by myself alone, who is empty from its own side." And Rinpoche says you can do whatever dedication is more effective for your mind to feel the emptiness. So these were the verses of dedication that Rinpoche gave to the man with Lou Gehrig disease. Very, very precious instructions there. Now, the next verse is 8, dedication for the sick. And it reads, may I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all the sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. So Shantideva is now moving from general to specific dedications. So here we're focusing on the sick, but in a special expanded sense, because from the perspective that beings in the world are alike in ailing from the travails of samsara, they are alike in needing a cure and escape from being thus trapped. But of course, we can also feel that this dedication is indeed for those who are suffering from cancer, contagious epidemics, etc. The essential point is that we are dedicating in this manner to ensure that we will indeed be able to assist them in real and practical ways, both now and in the future. Geshe Doga says, the specific dedication here is that due to these merits, may I be the medicine, the physician, and the nurse. These aspirations are not a mere wish. By dedicating one's merits in this way, we are implanting the seed in our mind to be actually able to help those in need. So we'll manifest, if you like, in a form of doctors, nurses, and so forth in the future when we acquire the conducive conditions to do so. So Geshe Doga adds, these aspirations by the great Bodhisattva Shantideva to benefit those who are sick are incredibly vast. I thought to mention here that the Buddha himself famously declared, "He who attends on the sick attends to me." There are numerous examples where we see the Buddha tending to the sick. On the occasion of making the above declaration, the Buddha had come upon a monk lying in soiled clothes due to having very, very severe dysentery, and who was desperately ill. As explained in the Vinaya Pitaka, quote, with the help of Ananda, the Buddha washed and cleaned the sick monk in warm water. On this occasion, he reminded the monks that they have neither parents nor relatives to look after them, so they must look after each other. If the teacher is ill, it is the bounden duty of the pupil to look after the teacher. And if the pupil is ill, it is the teacher's duty to look after the sick pupil. If a teacher or a pupil is not available, it is responsibility of the community to look after the sick. And on another occasion, as described in the Dhammapada, the Buddha discovered a monk whose body was covered in sores, his robes sticking to his body with pus oozing from the sores. Unable to look after him, the fellow monks had abandoned him. On discovering this monk, the Buddha boiled water and washed the monk with his own hands, then cleaned and dried his robes. When the monk felt comforted, the Buddha preached to him and he became an arhat, soon after which he passed away. So the courageous and selfless acts of nurses and healthcare workers during the COVID crisis are surely exhortations for those of us who call ourselves compassionate Buddhists to at least do as much as they. The ninth verse, dedicate to alleviate hunger and thirst, and it reads, may a rain of food and drink descend to clear away the pain of thirst and hunger, and during the eon of famine, may I myself change into food and drink. So Geshe Doga indicates that this verse, like the last, is in the form of an aspiration, but we shouldn't consider such aspirations to be merely idle wish fulfillment, dreaming, in other words. If we develop these aspirations and make these dedications now, we will definitely have the capacity to benefit others at the appropriate time. Geshe Doga mentions here the very significant words found in the short long life prayer for Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, which says, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honouring the three jewels. So we recite this at the end of the teaching. But have we ever really stopped to consider their great import? That Kabje Zopa Rinpoche is able to benefit sentient beings on such an unimaginatively vast scale and in so many particular and perfectly nuanced ways is precisely because of the aspirational prayers and dedications made in past lifetimes. So it is in this way that we can consider such masterful accomplishment of prayers made honouring the three jewels as nothing other than the magnificent ripening of these aspirations that were formerly made. So contemplating this point really gives us impetus to similarly shape our prayers. Aspirational prayers should be considered a very potent and precious aspect of our daily practice. For example, when we eat delicious, nourishing food, we can dedicate, as does Shantideva, quote, "May I become a rain of sustenance with 100 tastes, a nectar showering down unceasingly on all those in the world who are tormented by want of food and drink." So likewise, when we find ourselves hungry and thirsty, we can utilize this as the exact perfect moment to practice Tonglen meditation, whereby we take on the hunger and thirst of all suffering sentient beings and give them in return copious, enduring supplies of liquid and nourishment to support and strengthen them as they proceed to enlightenment. Verse 10, dedication for the fulfillment of all wishes. And it reads, "May I become an inexhaustible treasure for those who are poor and destitute. May I turn into all things that they could need, and may these be placed close beside them." So again, this takes the form of an aspiration in that one is dedicating one's merits as a means to fulfill the needs of sentient beings who lack the prerequisites and necessities by becoming ourselves a treasure vase that is inexhaustible. In other words, as Geshe Doga puts it, we are aspiring to become an inexhaustible treasure vault, which will naturally replenish itself no matter how much you take from it. This is an extraordinary, potent image of self, isn't it? It's vastly different notion of the self to the kind of agonized, self-cherishing, self-grasping self that is completely bound by its own crippling needs and expectations. So one would have to say that aspiring to become an inexhaustible treasure vase in this way is transforming our self-cherishing attitude. It's overhauling it and transmuting it into this absolutely unbelievable positive force that leaves all the apparatus and kind of baggage of egotistical self-obsession behind. So in the words of Kunzang Pelden, may I lie before them closely in their reach, a varied source of all that they might need. So we now reach a point of the third chapter where we're going to proceed with a very particular focus. We're going to be describing the various forms of mind training by which we bring about the mind of bodhicitta within our own continuum. And so mind training here, as all the commentaries indicate, is referring specifically to what is known as Lojong in Tibetan. So I'm going to quote here from Thupten Jinpa, and this is a great collection of mind training teachings from the Tibetan tradition, which has been exquisitely and importantly collated and translated by Thupten Jinpa. Lo, he says, stands for mind, thought, or attitudes, while Zhong connotes several interrelated but distinct meanings. First, Zhong can refer to the training whereby one acquires a skill or masters a field of knowledge. Zhong can also connote habituation or familiarization with specific ways of being and thinking. Thirdly, Zhong can refer to cultivating specific mental qualities, such as universal compassion or the awakening mind. Finally, Zhong can connote cleansing or purification, as in purifying one's mind of craving, hatred, and delusion. And Jinpa adds, all of these different meanings carry the salient idea of transformation, whereby a process of training, habituation, cultivation, and cleansing induces a profound transformation, a kind of metanoia from the ordinary deluded state whose modus operandi is self-centeredness to a fundamentally changed perspective of enlightened other-centeredness. End of quote. That's found on pages 1 and 2 of Thupten Jinpa's introduction. So this is indeed an excellent summary account of what is known as mind training techniques, and also it's referred as a descriptor for mind training texts, as they impart the methods of how we might transform away from our deep-seated self-cherishing attitude and towards its utter, complete replacement by a pure attitude of cherishing others. So critical to approaching such instructions is our recognition that our true enemy resides within, not without. As Thupten Jinpa says, the training involves a deep understanding of others as true friends, as more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, as Langri Tangpa puts it in his 8 verses of mind training. We feel hurt when someone insults us, disappoints us, when someone we love betrays us, outraged when provoked for no reason, pangs of jealousy when others are successful, all because of a deep-seated self-cherishing. It is self-cherishing that opens us to these painful and undesirable experiences. So the mind training teachings admonish us to banish all blames to the single source. Towards all beings, contemplate their kindness. And so the blaming to a single source is putting all the blame at the feet of our own self-cherishing. So this is the measure of the obstruction to developing the mind of bodhicitta. And so that is why Shantideva is now emphasizing these practices. So as I think it's very clear. So Kunzang Pelden, in his commentary at this point of the chapter, says, if we do not cut through the shackles of desire, it is impossible for the altruistic attitude to occur. So here the shackles of desire are referring to all of the network of operations that self-cherishing employs to maintain itself. And Kunzang Pelden quotes, "The sphere of living beings is unbounded. Likewise, the desire to help them all. And even if you lack the strength for the altruistic action, this is something you should constantly keep intend. In those who harbour wishes such as these, bodhicitta will indeed be born." So this is very, very important. Even if we lack the kind of wherewithal to generate this extraordinary mind as of now, to wish to generate it because we see the incredible benefits of doing so for others is a remarkable and wondrous thing. So Kunzang Pelden gives the following advice. He says, "The mind is trained by relinquishing for the sake of others the three foundations of ego clinging: the body, the possessions, and the roots of virtue. It is therefore crucial to school and habituate ourselves in an open-handed and generous state of mind. Of the three foundations of self-clinging, the body is most important. For we cling to our bodies as ourselves or as our property, and we egocentrically seize upon possessions, enjoyments, and virtues as a means to secure our physical well-being in this and future lives. In view of this, it is vital importance to sever attachment to our body." So it's in this way that we arrive at verses 11 and 12. So I'll start with 11. "Without any sense of loss, I shall give up my body and enjoyments, as well as all my virtues of the three times, for the sake of benefiting all." So Gyaltsabje's heading for this verse is the way of giving. So the purpose, as Geshe Doga emphasizes, of engaging in giving away one's possessions, one's body, food and drink and virtues, is to fulfill the temporary and ultimate goals of all sentient beings. So we'll recognize instantly that such an untrammeled generosity stands in stark or rude contrast to our usual self-cherishing attitude, whereby or wherein we somehow manage to give away some very small thing, but only because we've calculated that we'll be getting back at least that much in return, if not considerably more. In other words, we use a miserable or diminutive form of generosity as a bargaining chip, serving our own satisfactions. This is what Gyaltsabje means when he says that we must give with a mind free from regret and dependence. Dependence here means independence on fame and so forth, such as advantages to ourselves. Because if we are dependent in this way, we are incapable of pure giving. So Shantideva is asking us, advising us to give away our bodies and all of our belongings, which we hold so dear. Moreover, we're to do this sincerely and unparsimoniously, without counting the cost of expecting some recompense or karmic advantage in return. So Kunzang Pelden says, This is an essential pith instruction that drives out the fiend of ego clinging, the root of samsara. Whenever thoughts of cherishing attachment towards our body arise, we should face up to them squarely and at once, never losing sight of the view of no self, emptiness, and non-referential compassion. This will ensure that we are on the supreme path, and that beings who are like illusory visions will never be abandoned. End of quote. So the reference to non-referential compassion here is a reference to the third compassion, that of observing the inapprehendable, as famously mentioned in Chandrakirti's supplement to the Middle Way, and it says, homage to those those compassions for transmigrators seen as evanescence and empty of inherent existence, like a moon in rippling water. So we're to understand here that whatever is the third compassion necessarily realizes sentient beings to be without true or inherent existence. I mentioned this in passing because I know some of us attending these teachings are studying Lama Tsongkhapa's Illuminating the Intent, which is a detailed commentary on Chandrakirti's seminal text. So without going into detail here, the essential point is that in order to practice perfect giving in this unattached, unpolluted way, we need to combine it with an understanding of the emptiness of the giver, the gift, and the recipient. Likewise, to fully abandon our attachment to our body, we must recognize that our body is not inherently existent. It's not only not inherently existent as a body, but it's not inherently existent as our body, nor is it our self. Likewise, our possessions are not innately ours. If they were, how could we be ever separated from them, especially or even at the time of death? So we're being asked to view our body, in other words, by Shantideva, in a radically new way. In his training anthology, we find the following: once you have given your body and possession to others, you should continue to use the food and the clothes that were formerly yours, only as servants might use food and sustenance of their employers, solely to keep your body alive and for the benefit of others. And this is the crunch, extraordinary crunch. To do anything else is stealing. It's stealing because we have already given it away. And so to seek to take it back again with attachment is to rob others of the gift that had already been made. So in other words, there is no foundation, having given away our body, our possessions, and our merits, to seek to gain them back for our own egotistical security. Completely inappropriate way of responding. So our ability to give away our body, possessions, and virtues, therefore, becomes the measure of our capacity to overcome self-grasping, and therefore to give spontaneously and selflessly whatever is required to benefit others. So I'll just tackle the 12th verse and then throw it open. By giving up attachment to everything and offering, one goes beyond misery or sorrow. 12. By giving up all, sorrow is transcended, and my mind will realize the sorrowless state. It is best that I now give everything to all beings in the same way as I shall at death. So again, this is a very powerful pith instruction. In this altruistic context, the sorrowless state is referring to liberation, not for one's own sake, but as Gyaltsabje glosses, for the purposes of others. Indeed, Geshe Doga indicates that we can interpret sorrowless state in two ways. Firstly, a freedom from miseries, because the deluded obscurations have been overcome. And secondly, freedom from the imprints of the delusions, referring to the obscurations to omniscience, which prevent one from achieving full enlightenment. So Gyaltsabje, in reference to the third and fourth lines, which is best that I now give away everything to all beings in the same way as I shall at death, involves a revolutionary thought. Gyaltsabje says to surrender everything at once is equal to offering it. And to offer to sentient beings is the supreme offering, because through this offering, one attains enlightenment. So we might finish there for today, but just to throw it open, how are we going with the content again? It's very hard hitting, isn't it? Verse after verse. Are there any stories or questions or reflections that you would like to share?
Well, Ross, I would just like to echo your comment that it's very hard hitting. It's yeah, it requires, I find for me, a lot of integration, a lot of thinking, but it's a good thing, and I find, at strange times of the day, thinking about these lessons and the exhortations and so on, they just pop into my mind. So that way it's been very helpful.
Yeah.
Although not entirely comfortable.
And have you determined the reason for the discomfort?
Well, yeah, because it certainly challenges our complacency, our comfort, the familiar and habitual patterns that we have in our lives, makes us look at them in a different light. So that's probably one of the senses. And also, I guess, to be honest, there's, I feel that, maybe I haven't been quite as diligent and, yeah, quite as energetic at following some of these practices. But also, I think, as part and parcel of your presentation, you're also giving us the tools and the methods, and even what I find even more important for me, just for my own makeup, you give kind of the reasonings and justifications and thought processes behind all of these. It's not just a bare practice without context, without linking it to the other practices and explaining why it is there.
Yes, it's very, very precious. I think there's a sense, I was going to, when you were talking then, as to the reasons why it's not so easy to integrate the practices, there's a kind of reverse cognitive dissonance, isn't there? And we're being asked to give away our body totally, and we go, but wait a minute, how can I do that? What will I be left with? I'll be impoverished, I'll be stranded. And so we kind of panic. And so on that threshold, which is maybe a form of discomfort, or even kind of traumatized paralytic spirituality, if you like, because we're finding that our practice is invoking some really challenging thoughts. That's exactly the nodal point for bringing in the mind training techniques, because it's almost as though at that juncture of crisis, if you like, of self-cherishing, that it takes just a single deft maneuver to throw the system over and replace it. So I haven't got onto it here, but I had mentioned a little bit further on It's a bit like those, I did judo when I was a boy, and I used to be able to throw very big opponents with just a little deft foot movement that was so quick and so slender that it was impossible to be seen. And that huge bulking opponent would go clunk on the mat. And so this is how I see Lojong techniques, thought transformation, mind training techniques. We recognize the problem in all its massive enormity. And at that moment, it's vulnerable to being deftly circumvented and kind of replaced. So these are precious moments. And so I find this idea that surrendering everything at once is equal to offering it a really remarkable idea. That in offering our body, we are surrendering our attachment to it. And in surrendering our attachment to it, we're able to offer it. Those two processes are mutually supportive. In fact, they amount to the same thing. And so it's this freedom of untrammeled giving, no longer constrained by the weight of self-cherishing, that creates the momentum to attain enlightenment for the benefit of others. And so this is what Shantideva is getting at, moving towards with such incredibly persuasive psychological power. So I think it's wonderful in a way that we feel provoked and upset by some of these stanzas, because, as I mentioned, that is the degree by which we can measure the mechanism of our self-cherishing and begin to work to undo it, if you like. I was going to mention next week, but I might just touch on it now. I'll maybe expand it next week, but His Holiness, at this point of his commentaries on Shantideva, often interjects a discussion about the need to distinguish two different forms of self-regard. One form of self-regard is the selfish, egotistical, obsessive one, which is to be overcome. But there is another form of self-regard, which His Holiness says we should not forfeit. And we should, if we do forfeit it, we forfeit it at our peril. And that is a healthy concern for our well-being. So Shantideva isn't provoking us into sort of acts of bodily masochism, where we give away our body in a kind of unskillful manner so that we're left bereft and others are maybe not very well benefited because we have just done it impulsively or unskillfully. That is not what's being discussed here at all. And so there's an incredible potency here in the imaginative acts of giving. I say imaginative because we're performing it through the power of our mind to conjure the act of giving away our body. And the actual giving away of our body can and will occur at an appropriate time and place, but that isn't our immediate concern. So if we become too rigorous in our attempts to overcome self-cherishing by sort of attacking ourselves, we run the risk of attacking our capacity for transformation and developing a realization of our Buddha nature. So we must tease apart these two forms of self-regard. One is positive and is to be preserved, protected, and cultivated. And one is to be abandoned and given away. And psychologically, we mesh the two together and we find it very hard to separate. And that's why we get into such difficult emotional terrain. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Ross. And what I'm finding as well, with some of these selections and quotations that you've pulled together for us, and I'm just looking at Kunzang Peldon's text and a quotation you came up with today, and he's talking about mind training, but he says the mind is trained by relinquishing for the sake of others the three foundations of ego clinging, the body, possessions, and the roots of virtue. However, in the next sentence, he says, Beginners, however, should not actually surrender them in reality.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Where it is also said that if we try to do so without being truly able, the outcome will be nothing but a parody. And so I find that, like, the incredible compassion of our teachers and the commentators in these texts is also very helpful as well to bring us along the graded path. You know, you mentioned Chandrakirti and the Gompa Rabsel illuminating the intent, and we're just finishing up the first round. And it's really only an Arya Bodhisattva on the first round that is able to give up the body
exactly
without feeling physical pain.
Yes.
Now, of course, it's the Bodhisattva aspiration to be able to do that, but you know, there are so many other, as you say, kind of mental approaches to that, Tonglen being an example.
So I think this is why His Holiness, when he mentions having the text next to his pillow, he's actually talking about this direct application of the impact of particular verses in terms of our daily practice. And so, although we're running through them one by one in a very sort of methodical manner, in reality, I find that just opening this text, it's such a remarkable text that the first verse that your eye alights upon will be the perfect verse for today's activities. That's the nature of Shantideva's omniscient, compassionate wisdom, that the text works in this completely multilateral, productive way. And so I'm trying to share with you, throwing open the door to the text so that we see it as our companion. Yeah. So thank you for sharing this time together. And we're going to run over, so I'm going to ask Lou to dedicate. But of course, our dedications will have particular momentum, won't they? Because of the extensive presentation given by Shantideva's verses today. So thank you very much, Lou. And the long life prayers, of course, which are also requesting the Guru to live long and continue to turn the wheel of Dharma.
Okay. The dedication prayers from Shantideva. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, till then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honored, and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine actions spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In a land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until sattvic existence is ended. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you will uphold the seduous moral way, who serveth the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manchanath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers, honoring the 3 jewels, saving myself and others, your disciples. Please, please live long. Tenzin Usul Hita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Geshe Lupsum Doga, you with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space the Dharma of the Able One in general and the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme, superior, spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common cities. Geshe Tupten Sherab, beloved teacher leading your servant students toward wisdom and compassion, explains through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path. You are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. Multiplying mantras. Chom Dan Da Dejan, Shek Padra Chom Payang, Dak Pa Zog Pe Sangye, Nampa Nangze, Uki, Gyelpo, La Shag Shalo, Jangtub Sempa Sempa, Chenpo Kuntu Zangpo, La Shag Shalo, Tayata Panchagriya, Awa Badani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaye Murki Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaye Muke Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Muki Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Ava Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Muke Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Muki Swaha, Tayata Panchagriya, Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Muki Swaha.
Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone. Take care,
Thank you.
and I'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Ross. Feel better.
Bye.
Thank you all. Good night.
Slowly better. Yeah. Getting
Okay.
there.